Welcome to this special show on ET Now, Managing Responsible Business, the Role of Reputation and Ethics. Now, this discussion is brought to you in the backdrop of a report which has been released by CIMA. It's fourth in the last 4 years. That is the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants, which has really been tabling and following how companies are setting up processes in order to conduct business in a more ethical manner. Are they really walking the talk? Those are some of the aspects that we are going to focus on. And indeed, in the current context of nearly a scam every day, whether it is here in India or overseas, these are critical issues that companies need to look at. They appear to be focusing on them, but are they really bringing about that much-needed behavioral change as far as the internal DNA is concerned? Let me pose that question to my panelists who join me on the show. Let me start off with Keshav Murugesh, who is the CEO of WNS. Andrew Harding, the Managing Director at CIMA. Girish Bhatt, the CFO of Gammon India. And finally, we have Neville Dumasia, Partner Risk Advisory, ENY. Gentlemen, many thanks for joining us on the show. So let me start with you, Andrew, because CIMA has been conducting these studies. Take us through really the key findings this time around as far as business ethics is concerned. One would be tempted to ask the question, how bad is it really right now in the current environment?
There are really two things that we're finding. The first thing is that companies are actually doing more reporting. There are more codes around this area. But I think the second and perhaps the concerning factor around it is accountants working in business are feeling under pressure like they never have done before to behave unethically. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, that's the cause for concern. That's the reason why we're worried. We are
tracking stories and scams and scandals almost on a daily basis. I mean, post-Satyam, of course, the spotlight has been even brighter as far as, or stronger as far as India Inc. is concerned. But in this current environment, would you say things are taking a turn for the worse in terms of pressure on companies to meet those bottom line targets and forget, you know, good CSR and ethics, so to speak?
My view is as follows. I think the pressure on an organization to perform in terms of having sustainable growth will always exist. Whether it's a transactional period of a quarter or a year or a couple of years, that to my mind is lesser of a challenge because it's really an accounting framework. But a corporate is actually required to have sustainable, profitable growth. And to my mind, therefore, I don't really think the situation is actually worsening. I think the situation is just unearthing some of the issues, some of the scandals that have come to fore today. And I think we are seeing that not only in India, but we are seeing it across the world as well.
Keshav, how would you like to join in terms of this conversation? Because trust deficit, it exists perhaps to many of us who are observing what's happening, but also to those within the organization. How do you build that trust to really believe, especially in this current environment?
That's a great question. I think from my perspective, what I'm going to do is to keep building this environment of trust in you in terms of what corporates are doing, corporates like WNS are doing, and what corporates can do actually in this space. And if you actually look at, you know, Peter Drucker's definition of ethics, he actually says ethical behavior is, you know, what you use, you know, as a personal standard in a business situation. It's as simple as that, right? What you would do for yourself and how are you now conducting yourself, you know, while running a company. So I think from a company's point of view, as Neville said, the need, you know, to continuously grow and to be profitable is something that is dictated. You need to keep doing that. But at the same time, if you don't create a set of rules to govern that growth, then you could be, you know, setting yourself up for anarchy, right? And I think that is where, you know, most corporates focus on really creating a very clear mission statement across the company, a very clear set of values at the company, and then driving that by constant fostering and communication of these values across the globe, you know, in every, you know, internal citizens' minds, and also delivering that message to the external forces, you know, your suppliers, the people you do business with, because we all understand that end of the day, it is not just your employees that want to feel safe and feel, you know, good about working in an organization. It's also your suppliers, you know, who want to feel empowered and feel, you know, good working with you.
Absolutely. In fact, let me take that forward with you, Girish, because in a sense, you left a multinational corporation and you have tried to set up those systems and processes in a promoter-led company here in India. What were the challenges that you faced?
I think the most important thing is, as Keshav was saying, is the tone at the top. And clearly, I think you can set up your policies, processes, and what I call it, the code of ethics and conduct, you can set it up. But what is more important is that how you communicate to your employees. And for that, what is more important is that the tone at the top. And in my business especially, it is coming from the owners makes a big difference. And that what I think drives the organization in terms of if to drive the organization in a really ethical fashion, because clearly what we are trying to do in the business is that we have got an independent internal audit system, and therefore if any NCRs comes into the business, I think it has been clear guidelines and communication happens from the chairman saying that all these NCRs must be closed in time. And also, if anything which is not been closed, I think he must be communicated.
So clearly we've established one aspect, and this is what your study also talks a lot about, Andrew, in terms of the tone from the top. But, your study also mentioned one thing, and that is there is a gap between rhetoric and reality over ethical performance. Does that start all the way from the top? Is that what your study seems to suggest in terms of its findings this time?
I mean, it's around, we talk about tone from the top, and that is senior managers, leaders, being seen to walk the walk. But that's leaders throughout the business. It's not just the board directors who are the leaders. There are leaders at every level. And it has to be completely embedded. And that involves, more than just the rhetoric. That involves training, it involves understanding, it involves deep, deep commitment within the organisation. And I think that's the next step that businesses need to make if they're going to genuinely address this issue.
When companies go multinational, when they go into the national arena, they have to imbibe and follow some of those processes and that code of conduct.
Of course.
It has to come naturally almost.
Of course.
Right.
But that's not to say that the mass majority don't follow those. It may not just be as well articulated and followed as some of the larger organizations do.
Right, because that's a scale, or rather that's the aspect, that the multinational aspect that one takes on board. But Keshav, when you actually come to doing business in India, many people would say, listen, just look the other way, because it's a small price to pay, so to speak, in actual terms, for the business gains that you'll make for perhaps not following some of those codes.
I'm going to continue to be the dissenter, and again, if you look at the history. You look at what Chanakya says in the Arthashastra. You look at what so many of these old people have said. Historians, Socrates. You look at what Plato has said. You will see that all of them have said. Adam Smith, for example, in The Wealth of Nations. They all say that business and ethical behavior cannot be divorced from each other. So it's been there. It's available, and people have been propagating it for centuries. And from an India point of view, my experience has been that if you are tough and if you send out a clear signal that you are not going to compromise in terms of your values and your ethics, nobody can come in your way.
Okay, let's take a break on that note, because when we come back, we'll discuss in terms of some of those practices that have been followed, some of those which have worked, some which haven't, both within India as well as internationally. You're watching our special show which focuses on business ethics, brought to you in association with SEMA. Stay with us on ET Now. Welcome back. Let's take that point forward that Keshav just mentioned, and I'd like to turn to Andrew on this, because Andrew, today in the world, if you take a look at the banking industry, clearly it's under a huge cloud. In India, of course, we've had our share of many scams and scandals, and the point of the matter is there seems to be an increasing cry for better regulation, because the conclusion seems to be that companies simply cannot be trusted to do the right thing. Do you think is that where the answer lies?
I think every time we see a scandal, there's always a cry for more regulation, and each time we see that regulation coming in, we have another scandal. It's not about regulation. It's about a mindset. It's about how people believe they should behave. It's about business managers doing the right thing, even when they're not being watched, regulations about doing the right thing when you are being watched.
Right.
So there's much more to it than just regulation. Regulation isn't the solution. It's a quick thing for governments to say, okay, we will regulate, we will solve it with that. But that doesn't touch the surface of it.
Because your report mentions in the last 4 years, as you've been tracking sort of the development or the progress on this front made by companies, clearly seems to point to the fact that companies are putting those structures in place. But yet, in terms of behavior, as you mentioned in your report, the behavioral intent, that is taking a long time to change.
And I think that's the case in any business. If you try to change a culture, that takes much, much longer than changing a process.
Neville, let me come to you here because when it comes to for instance, we are in the midst of a government which is talking about increasing regulation, making it mandatory for companies to invest, for instance, 2% of their profits in CSR. It's invited a whole lot of angst-ridden statements from India Inc. But, the government believes that this is the right way to do it. How would you...
Sure. So I quite agree with Andrew. I think the answer is not more regulation, because if you compare several of our regulations across most of the Asian countries, you'll find that India is one of the most regulated countries in the Asian economy.